everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Context. We have a good conversation going today. I'm actually going to be joined by one of my co-founders at Obot. Bill Maxwell is going to come and talk to us. But with that, I want to welcome Bill to the stage. Bill, thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to have this talk. And obviously, you and I have known each other for 15 years, so it's not the first time we've shared a stage. I think your profile picture up there is starting to look a little out of date. I don't know if that's
yeah, I'm definitely a little more gray than I was there.
I just noticed that when I looked at it, like, oh, I remember when you looked like that. It's a little bit I think mine's even worse. Anyways, excited to have this talk. You're going to be talking about centralized management and auth. This is an area that you've been kind of diving into enormously the last 5 months as you've been helping people build out OAuth at scale and how to deal with a lot of the tricks of actually turning MCP from a kind of client-side protocol that runs on the laptop to something that people can use at enterprise scale. And so, really excited to have this talk. I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away, buddy.
Let's dive in. So we're going to be talking about implementing centralized control plane and governance and auth around MCP servers. As we've been working with a lot of customers and people in the community, what we found is, MCP development is pretty simple, right? There's tens of thousands of MCP servers that prove it. It's very easy to spin one up. The ability to build something useful quickly is certainly straightforward. The business logic, the tools, the prompts, that's all vibe coded. Typically, if you're going to be interacting with some sort of API, anything like that. Where it gets a bit more tricky is when you start getting into the OAuth area, which is really solves a lot of problems when you want to be able to interact with things securely. It's been around for a long time, but it's always been a bit of a challenge, but definitely worth the effort. And it gives you, each MCP server, as you're building these out, the frameworks make it pretty straightforward and easy. They build in a lot of the scaffolding and some hooks in there. Certainly great for a demo. But what we're finding is as you bring that into the enterprise and you want to put the production level security requirements and hosting and everything along the lines of actually bringing that to the environment, that's where it gets a bit more challenging, more tricky, right? Each development team has to host, you have to manage secrets, you've got to audit and put those logs someplace for the security team or someone that can actually monitor and see what's going on. These are credentials, so you're managing encryption. Like, you can't just store these at rest and plain text or anything like that. You've got your ability to content filters, like what's actually going to and from those MCP servers, how is that implemented? And then there's the overall access and revocation of who has access to these servers. And so it's a lot to consider. And as you're putting it into these enterprise environments and these different development teams are building out the tooling along these lines, you end up with this situation where you've got each MCP server implementing OAuth, maybe using a different framework, maybe using, one's using Python, one's using the TypeScript stuff. And then you've got all of the scaffolding around that, the operational pieces. And so if those aren't standardized and you basically end up kind of with a hodgepodge of, different implementations and different solutions. And so what you want to be able to do is consolidate all of that down so that the MCP teams, the development teams building your MCP servers, are really just focused on the parts that add value, right? The tools, the resources, the prompts, being able to actually, connect those up to agents and actually, getting work done. That's really where the value ends up being. And then you can offload a lot of that scaffolding and handling back to a centralized control plane. And when you do that, you open up a lot of different things. You unlock a lot of different capabilities. So one, you can standardize that OAuth implementation and the way that tokens are managed and rotated. All of that's handled centrally. So then you can secure, lock it down. A platform team or an operations team can handle all of that. From a client perspective, you can provide a lot of the front-end capabilities that the MCP clients really lean heavily on. In OAuth, there's a series of trusts that happen, and so that you have the clients, and then when they typically register to the thing that they're authenticating to, and so MCP leans heavily into being able to do that dynamically, because they, on the premise that you're going to have a lot of these clients, they're going to come and go. These agents will spin up, they'll do something and then kind of drop back down, and then another one will spin up and connect and drop back down. So they leverage something called dynamic client registration. They've also implemented SIMD, which is the content management documents, which go on the which basically hosts in that way. It bypasses some of the enterprise constraints around DCR, but it still presents a challenge. And so with the gateway, you can implement it once on the front end, and everyone just leverages it, and so you get better accessibility to your clients, because MCP, part of the benefit of it overall is it has been widely adopted. And so if you build an MCP server, you will get a broad range of clients that can connect and use it. So you get a good distribution channel there for sure. The other bits that start adding is the governance and the control plane pieces. So being able to do fine-grained access controls, being able to do filtering, being able to say who at a broad level has access to specific MCP servers is really important, and is enabled by having a centralized control plane. And so just kind of looking at a couple different pieces of this unlocks. We've got our standardized OAuth implementation. So here, with a centralized control plane, we're going to provide our clients with a DCR endpoint, making it easy for them to connect, and they just have to point to the URL, right? They don't have to do any other bits there to connect, which is really nice from a client onboarding experience. It handles the OAuth flow and it manages the OAuth tokens. So in this situation, ideally, your MCP servers after the OAuth flow, they're not necessarily giving that API key back to the client, right, to talk directly to the remote service. So in your centralized control plane can kind of broker that. It's in store the upstream and issue a different token, and then when the request comes in, it makes it. So that way you kind of lock down who has access to those different pieces there. And then the other key thing is the centralized auditing and revocation of access. So here, you want to be able to see which tool calls are being made, which clients are connecting, which information is going back and forth, which user, to be able to answer that, who did what when, that so often shows up on audits. So I think a good way to kind of dive in is to look at a demo. So we'll just kind of look at what the OAuth implementation looks like from a code and server side of things. So here, so here, if we look at a, hopefully this is coming through.
It's coming through, Bill, but yeah, can you make it a little bit bigger? Maybe the text. There we go.
Cool. So here we're looking at an MCP server that's just using fast MCP with Azure. And so the framework has some built-ins, and out of the box for a demo, it does all the right things locally for like local scale. So here, but it is doing the Azure provider, so it's doing the exchange. It is also issuing refresh MCP access tokens, so the clients can refresh their tokens. It validates the incoming tokens. It serves the metadata, so that everything that the server needs to function in this flow works. And so here it's talking directly to Azure. It's getting all of the the requests and scopes, and then it will also, this is an MCP server that talks to Microsoft's Graph API. And so it's going to get a token issued for itself that it can exchange for a token to use to, in this case, we're going to have a couple silly tools that one just says hello and the other lists junk mail and can draft an email as well. So when you use it in a gateway, you simplify that a bit by still having to verify that the token is for you, and then still tell the gateway where to go and get, where to go authorize to communicate with this. So it is a, you just tell it, go over to Microsoft and authorize, and then come back. And then here we do the OBO exchange, and then we just have our normal tools that we're going to be implementing. And so in this demo, I've set up a script. So basically, I set up a Azure app for the server, which allows it to get OBO tokens to read the user and some email actions. And then I also create a client app registration, which is going to go on the gateway. And the gateway will use this to get a token to talk to the server. And so that is kind of how that's all set up. And so if I come here into our gateway and I get to our Entra server here, I've added it. I've pointed it at a remote URL. And then I've supplied OAuth credentials for that application that I created in Entra. And so now, as a user, if I've decided that I want to use this, I can connect to it. And I don't authenticate right now. So I just get my URL for my gateway to connect to this. And so if I come over to my terminal and I use OpenCode here, I can add an MCP server. I'm going to say live demo MCP. It's a remote, and give it the URL from my gateway. It does require OAuth. And no, it doesn't need to pre-register. And what this means is I don't have to go and get an application client ID and secret ID. So if you're familiar with like maybe GitHub or something, in your developer settings, you can get an OAuth app and you give it the redirect URL where it's going to come back to, and you register that one client. And so in that case, you would have to potentially do it for every connection or client that you want to configure the connection. So here we've added our MCP server, and so now I can do MCP auth. I will auth to our live, and I've gone through the OAuth flow very seamlessly. And now when I load up OpenCode, I should be able to list my junk mail. So I can now have my tool call the Microsoft endpoints, and it's calling my live demo MCP server and listing the most recent set of junk mail that I've got. So this is cool. Now, if I come back to my gateway, I can look and see my audit logs that I've just been making these tool calls. And so, as a security team, I can see that this client connected. It was OpenCode from this address. Here were the headers. Here's the request and response bodies that it actually got. And so here now we're auditing this. These can be exported and shipped into your overall security tools that are being constantly monitored in kind of your standard flows. But you're getting this visibility that you would not necessarily get without having a centralized gateway or a centralized place to come and see it aggregated. So now let's talk about one next thing here. this one's really powerful, and that's the ability to, since you're in this data path and you can see what's going back and forth, the ability to filter the requests so that you can ensure PII isn't leaving your data center. You're potentially, if you're reading issues or tickets from a public source like GitHub, or support tickets from like a Zendesk situation, you're reading those and they're coming in. You can take a look to make sure that it's not trying to inject anything to your as you're pulling it in, that your models aren't going to necessarily be hijacked and do something else that you wouldn't necessarily want it to do, or grab private keys and put it back up on the internet or something like that. So you can apply these filters within your centralized gateway as well. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here I've got a endpoint that is going to get my draft email, right? I wouldn't necessarily want something to pick up something sensitive or PII data and start emailing that out. So in my draft email tool, I'm going to basically apply this filter. I'm going to find my, where to go? Looking for my OBO, demo OBO, it's always the last one. Confirm that. So now when the gateway sees a tool call being made to draft email, it will apply this filter. And so here, save that. Now let's say I need to draft a test email to bill@acorn.io. Subject, contact info, and let's say tunes SSN is 555. This is just made up and random. And so I've got my MCP server tool, and this should trigger the draft email, and it should block based on what we're trying to accomplish here. So here, what you would see is the model's processing, it's thinking. It doesn't seem to want to actually do that. The models have definitely gotten better. Maybe block that out. This is a live demo, but I think in general it's good that the models themselves need a lot of persuasion to actually do this type of stuff. Yeah. So it should actually make that call. Ooh. We'll go through, always having a little bit of a demo issue there. So we reset the connection, perhaps that'll get it working.
I love that the model is trying to stop you before you can even use the filter.
Yep, it's like, no, you really don't want to do this. Always mind your manners with the models. So there. So here, that's exactly what we were hoping for. We saw there that the PII filter actually kicked in and said, no, you're trying to send something here that won't work. So if we come back now and see in our audit logs, we can see that we were trying to call this draft email, and we can see that, hey, trying to do this on the request, and the webhook fired off and said no. or maybe it's saying actually that my webhook was dead. Either way, it did the right thing in trying to fire off the webhook. And so now, we can say, okay, that's now we're able to actually filter and secure this this communication path and ensure that data that we don't want leaving our walls goes out. And so that is.
So what other kind of things besides PII have you seen people wanting to filter? Are there other examples you've run into?
Yeah, I mean, PII actually comes up as probably the lead. Oftentimes there's sentiments around like guardrail type things, like, is this, what type of speech is this, and being able to regulate it that way. Interestingly, like rate limiting ends up being a commonly tied into this filtering capability. And so being able to say, this agent can only hit the MCP server once per some interval versus this user who's live interacting can hit it a couple times within the same interval. So we have seen a lot of usage requests there, and being able to kind of control and gate what's happening upstream becomes a pretty common request as far as what to use some of these filters for.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the main bits that I wanted to show today. Whoops, wrong window. Sorry about that.
Very cool, man. So like as you think about kind of the broader set here, it seems like OAuth and identity management has been kind of a consistent challenge you've been dealing with. But are you not finding also that just sort of these gateways as a central point of control and access control and stuff like that are also like, that's what I've heard, as much as like the technical challenges of getting OAuth working at scale for companies that are building lots of these, I hear a lot. But I also feel like there's a lot of challenge just around who can see what MCP, who can upload MCPs, who can build MCPs. Like there's process challenges here that organizations are totally dealing with as they kind of scale up, because that's what we're seeing, is that the rapid growth of last year of MCPs in the public space is now being reflected in crazy rapid growth of MCPs in the private space.
Yeah, no, yes. So certainly around the MCP servers, auth is sort of like the front and center, because it's sort of the day zero showstopper, right? If I can't authenticate to this thing, we can't go much further, right? And so that's certainly one of the initial things that people come to, but typically right after that, you're exactly right. They're hitting on the ability to say, okay, I've got this MCP server and I want to be able to give my developers ability to view their production environments. They can see stuff, what's going on, maybe get some logs, troubleshoot, interact with it that way, but they can't necessarily have access to change anything, right? Like that has to go through kind of the standard change management deployment procedures, right? So being able to, take the same MCP server and authorize specific tools for one group versus being able to authorize tools for another is definitely, a key thing that the gateway can help orchestrate and facilitate there. The other thing, is if you've got like a shared service, you've got a shared API key, and you don't want to have everyone go get that API key, or you don't want to have to deploy multiple per user. So being able to share sort of like a service account type of key, but still protect that behind like an enterprise gateway or the enterprise authentication system. So you want to have, Entra or Okta or Auth0, something out front that everyone at least has to authenticate to, and then be authorized by the gateway to access, through a group like, this group of people has access to this key. That certainly falls into like another area where a centralized control plane can help. And sort of facilitate those types of interactions and access controls.
All right, well, wrap us up. This is software, a SaaS. Like, how do people get it? How do they set it up? How do they use it? What's the where do they go to download and try it or sign up for an account?
Yeah, so Obot is open source software that you can deploy on-prem. It's easy to get started with either running on Docker, or if you want to scale it, try it on a Kubernetes cluster. I think the getting started on docs.obot.ai is a great place to go to start testing it out. There are hosted solutions that could be used as well. If you contact us, the chat.obot.ai is another place to check out the chat side of things, connect to some MCP servers, interact with an agent to talk and try out those MCP servers. So lots of ways to pick it up.
Awesome. And the open source version and an enterprise version, what's different?
Yeah, the key differences there are on the auth provider side. So Entra, Okta, those are all part of the enterprise edition. The ability to manage with groups is part of that. And then connecting to LLMs through when you go to use your agent, if you want to connect through Azure OpenAI or Amazon Bedrock. Those are part of the enterprise edition as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for being here, Bill. It was great having you. And everyone else, thanks very much for being here. Like we've got some great content coming up in the next couple of weeks. So tune back in. Thanks a lot. Take care, Bill.
Thanks.